Hello and welcome back to The Climb, episode 5, your somewhat weekly podcast with us, the Taverners. I'm your host, as usual, for today. My name is Zach. Joining me are my two regular co hosts. We have Vincent
Heyo.
and Virgil.
Yo.
And the topic of this week podcast is, of course, another patch rundown, but this time we're going to streamline it, get straight into the action, and hopefully go over some other things we've seen over the week related to the league scene, right? Whether it's our own adventures, whether it's stuff we've seen in pro play, items, Twitter, whatever it be, right? So without further ado, just going to go straight into the patch notes
Let's get it.
for, yeah, what is it? Point 4?
Yeah, 25.4.
Amazing. So, who wants to? Okay, first of all, we got an Ash buff. Any of you two more AD carry intrinsic players want to start this off, or
Yep, I think Ash buff, just from a feels perspective, definitely warranted. But there's it's a double-edged sword in my opinion, because Ash definitely has been feeling a bit weaker, especially when they switched to the more pure crit path, and you lost a bit of build versatility. So Ash, we used to see permanently rushing Static, Kraken, and having a notoriously strong early game, something that didn't really allow you to slip up against a very easy lane to win. But now she's kind of more tied to hitting those crit spikes, getting that IE in order to do any significant damage and get use out of her passive. So on the one hand, I think it's a bit sad because Ashe is one of the funnest AD carries to play. But on the other hand, I think it's been nice to see her out of meta for a while because we've been so used to her being such a great blind pick, a really easy pick to play and pick up, and just an all around default. It's nice to see a bit of variety now and again.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. Like that like entire like patch where she was like just not even a patch, it was like over that long period where she was really good. I was just like it was she was either like she's picked in most situations because she could be like the fill kind of AD carry. Like if you didn't know what to play, Ash is always viable. And like into like certain champions she just excel in. And with her being like sent out, it was good, but it also like meant that like other champions were like stronger, and so like seeing her coming back in, I feel like that's a great thing.
What do you think
okay?
about the direction of the buffs themselves? From what it looks like, it's just damage increases to all her damaging abilities. Do you think that's a
I
healthy way
think
of buffing her, or do you think they should
I
try a
think
different
so.
direction?
I think so because her biggest problem, in my opinion, was that her lack of damage, like when she hit those items compared to other AD carries. Yes, she was strong one item, and yes, she like hit it pretty comfortably. But like if you're going into like some other champions, like we're talking about now, right, where like it's mainly crit, her damage just falls off. I feel like there's not really any good items that are like good for her in the meta right now. And
Hmm.
so having this Q increase later on, I think it's warranted, and W damage ratio increased, also quite
Mm.
nice to see. And R damage, I mean, I guess early game it can help, but but to be honest, you don't really use R to kill people, but it's definitely a nice thing to have,
That's a
like having slightly higher damage.
250, which
Um,
is the new value, is an extreme amount of burst, especially on a
yeah,
early accessible ulti like Ash.
Well, on level
agreed, agreed.
6, definitely. On level 6, that's like a huge, honest to God increase because 50 damage early game is it's generally like it's one of those things you notice,
Yeah,
100%.
I
Like
mean,
late game, those kind of things don't matter as much, but early game, hell yeah.
think about the electrocute change from last patch. That was what was it, like 20 damage or 30 damage they gave it,
Yep, 20 damage.
and
Yeah.
that rune just overnight became a go-to on a bunch of champions. So a 50 damage increase on this ability might not seem like much, but it'll really change some outcomes. I'm just personally worried that Ash might see a few more pokey spam builds coming back, which never fun for anyone involved. But other than that, I'm happy to see her re-enter the meta. Hopefully not too
Mm.
strong, but not too weak either.
The, I also was thinking because of W AD ratio is like that really annoying Ash like support build might maybe be popping up slightly a bit more because you have higher agency with like maybe 0.1% AD increase. But other than that, no. I feel like it's a good direction overall.
I think with the Bloodsong nerfs, there shouldn't be too much of a worry
Yeah.
in that regard, which I would hope for. I mean, like, you could still argue, obviously, the mandate being the first time rush and that it are going up 50 damage and it's an AP scaling, possibly, but honestly, I don't think it's something to worry too much about. I think it'll happen, but that's whatever, right? It's solo queue, everyone's going to try something stupid. The only thing I think about Ashe is like what you said earlier about like her late game, her damage kind of falling off. I think she's always been a hyper carry, but compared to other hyper carries like like your Zarya, Jinx, even your Kai'Sa, that damage was definitely lackluster at the like 4 item mark. So I think this change is perfectly fine. I don't really think she's too OP, and I think she's just going to a better spot really. But only time will tell.
Definitely. Next up, we got Echo with a Q damage increase. Zach, I think you play the most Echo out of anyone here.
I mean, the champ. I think things. I think the way the champ is designed, he's just an assassin. That's how he should be played. So I think with the electric buff and this, because it's just a Q1, so it's not like it's not too bad. It's quite. I mean, if you're gonna get hit by any part of the Q, it would be the Q1 most of the time. So it's nice, but I don't think it changes much. I don't think the champ's weak though. I think the champ is perfectly fine. But I would say is like he's still, in my opinion, he still feels nicer to play in jungle compared to mid. But given some mid matchups, the champs you're really strong into, right? They're not really in meta right now. But that's the main reason.
I also
Okay.
feel like it increases like his push power early game. Having that 10 extra AD when you can, shove the wave, just like keep on like throwing your Qs out, like 10 AP like kind of adds up in my opinion.
100%. Yeah, that should change because like usually by level 7 you can one shot the wave with Q and the D ring. If you
Yeah.
hit all the minions and order them. But I think this would actually make a nice change. Definitely put him in contention for mid. Because I do, even though I prefer him jungle, he definitely should be played mid. That's his main role. That's how he should have been played, right? He makes the most sense in that, especially as assassin. So yeah, I think nice buff change, but it's not going to take him out of the window into something completely egregious.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, we have Gangplank with an AD growth increase. I'm not sure what the idea is behind that, but I will say that I haven't been seeing as much Gangplank as possibly a few patches ago. Has anyone been following Gangplank recently?
I haven't been seeing him at all. Like one of my friends played Gunplank and he stopped playing the game because Gunplank isn't that good anymore. And so seeing this 80 growth, I think it's warranted. But they have to be really careful. Because like he's one of these champions where small changes, it's like a ripple effect where small changes can have huge impacts on him.
What do you
Yeah,
think?
I mean, I would say because last time we saw relevance for him, right? I feel like it's a couple months ago when the people were like not discovering, but trying out the like arcane comic Gangplank to kind of give him that early game. I don't think he was lacking in, but that actually like almost like cheese, right? It's almost like a cheese tactic to actually maximize your damage early, so that you can actually get to that point where you want to be like a scaling monster. Because what is it? His barrels go up to I think it's like 35% armor ignoring, by
Yeah,
late game.
40%. Yeah.
40%, yeah. So again, like that kind of thing with AoE is insane, but you kind of have to get to that point. And his playstyle is so niche that I guess you couldn't get to it, so that's why people were doing the arcane comet thing. But since then, I haven't really seen him much. I think it's perfectly fine. Wouldn't do much for his early game, but his mid game definitely gets a bit more uh, reliable, I'd say.
Agreed. 100%.
Yep,
Just better
I'm
overall in
interested
the
to
mid
see
game.
how it'll play out.
I think in the current meta, he just doesn't really stack up against anyone else, especially the items, right? Because he's a Triforce user, first and foremost. I can't think of anything else he'd want to go. And in the current meta, I just don't see that one item power spike Triforce being as strong as, like when people get their Sunnet Strike or if they even go Cleaver or something. Like, even though Triforce is a really good item, it's usually one of those things that I feel like spikes on 2 items with anyone who actually builds it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's always seemed like a Sheen user, you know what I'm saying? Where before it was Essence Reaver, and with the removal of the Sheen on Essence Reaver, he he was forcibly moved to Triforce again because of it. I'm not saying that like Triforce was bad, but you used to like build crit because that's what he liked with the passive and how it scaled with crit. But now
And
since like I
the
mean you can
barrels,
still
right?
go crit, but it's not as potent as when it was when it was, the meta with Essence Reaver and Navori and that.
Maybe. I do remember being like Triforce Collector at some point, and when Essence was initially changed.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
yeah, I think
yeah.
it's for his barrels, right? Because his barrels have the crit, not his passive. His passive is
Yeah.
2 damage, his barrels have that crit scaling, which is, yeah. I mean, we'll see. I don't think it's going to change much, but I'm sure it'll just, bring him up that 1%, 2% win rate that makes people go, oh, wait, the champ should be okay now, just not strong or too strong.
Generally, what do we prefer? Do we prefer when Gangplank is more of a bruiser, or do you prefer this more recent one-shotty barrel-reliant Gangplank?
I prefer the bruiser more than the one shot. Yes, the one shot is more. Actually, with the removal of Prowler's Claw, I think crit is fine. I like to say crit is fine because he can't just Prowler's Claw onto you if you're ranged and then just auto you, but he can still barrel you, which is like his entire thing, where he takes an entire zone, and if you don't respect him, he will do his thing.
I just think he's a top lane. He's built for top lane. It's like I don't. It feels weird because his stats are still kind of skewed towards a top laner. So when he was building crit, he still had those weird, like really high base, like HP regen, all these things that you kind of shouldn't have if you're playing crit to go full damage. And he didn't really have any fall off for going crit either. It wasn't like, oh, he's trading He's trading his sustainability or like his laning phase for crit. He just wasn't. So I would prefer Bruiser compared to crit. But I can understand why gang players obviously want crit because that again, why would you put crit in his kit if you don't want him to have some sort of focus towards that?
Mm-hmm.
They'd have to change his scalings, I'd say, but we'll see. We'll see. I don't think he's gonna become relevant anytime soon. He's always been a menace in the past.
Agreed.
Speaking of menaces, the next buff being Jace, the W attack speed now reaches that 3% attack speed cap. Again, I don't really mind it. I think it's just a like quality of life buff more than anything.
Yeah, I think if anything, people who have the Jace matchup ingrained, they're used to how fast that W comes out. Now I'm probably gonna have to think about their spacing a bit better when he has that ability up. But other than that, I don't really think it will change the champ dramatically.
Yeah, I feel like it's just more of a quality of life, as Zach said. It's just people that are picking him up will probably have an easier time with his W and how to use it.
Yeah, I think it's just gonna result in a few people getting caught off guard. Because
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys, but like even as someone who doesn't play top that often, I know in my head exactly how long a JSW takes.
Yeah.
Like how long those
Yeah.
autos take. That's just one of the values that gets stored in your brain when you play League a lot. So it's just gonna be weird seeing that come out faster.
There was a funny interaction with him, like his W and lethal tempo, where like because he hits the attack speed cap, his lethal tempo actually does like 100 damage, a little like tick. So
That sounds
maybe we
funny.
can see, maybe we can see a little bit of lethal tempo Jace.
God no, please don't ever say, bro. No.
The
We will not
tavern
do
would
that.
like to officially state that we do not endorse lethal tempo Jace at any time.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. for
Vincent is his own
understanding.
spokesperson. He does not speak for any of us. Thank God. That would be a
Whoa,
mess that wouldn't happen. No
I just
thanks.
saw some interaction that was funny, so I wanted to spread the news.
All right.
Propaganda, as we say.
And the next news is that Nautilus is getting a Q damage buff of approximately
Nautilus.
15 damage at every level. What do we think about this?
Early game
Ridiculous.
it's huge. I think it's pretty good. He just didn't feel. It doesn't feel like as strong as other engage, considering like Leona, Rel. These champions are like pretty
Really?
much seen permanently. I think he's fine, but like the buff is like nice to have.
I mean,
Really?
It's just
to me, he
comfort
has
buff.
seemed like the weakest engage for a while. However, I think this buff is addressing him in the wrong way. Like, the problem with Naut, from my perspective, is that he gets blown up so quickly when he fails, and he doesn't really contribute anything different other than perhaps the guaranteed ultimate, which is nice.
Yeah.
And that's
So
the point of
giving
him,
him
I'd
more
say.
damage, I feel like just feeds into an unhealthy thing, and it's more of a compensation for support losing a bit of damage on the previous patch than anything else.
I mean, it's like because obviously Bloodstone got nerfed, and you're seeing a bunch of Glacial Augment. That's how you used to do Glacial Augment Nautilus. But I wouldn't be surprised if people go Bloodstone on him again if they're just not gonna with his Q buff damage. Like, there's no reason not to. It is actually a pretty nice amp for that. Even with a nerf, it's still just a nice thing to do.
Mm.
I think because I've seen a couple of people try to do like W max Nautilus before, because obviously the W is a shield, and you don't really need the hook half the time. The hook is quite a low cooldown in the first place, especially if you're hitting them, because it reduces it whenever you hit it by 50%. So maybe they're trying to move people away from W max Nautilus, but yeah, like I'd agree that if you want to actually buff his tankiness, give his W more urgency. Like make that shield like last longer, or like something like that, without giving it bonus like damage over time that normally happens with his W being up.
Yep.
But I think like I said, but Leonorel, yeah, he's not that good, but he's still really prominent. He's still like a very good champ, and especially because his R is, as we said, just guaranteed lock on. That's mainly the reason you pick him for something like if they have a Vayne, maybe they have like some sort of pesky mid lane you can't reach otherwise. So I don't think this is necessary in the slightest. I think especially with how easy he is to play and how he does just fit no matter what you play him with. He's always got some sort of utility. And
Yep.
if you do want to make him more useful, just make him tankier. It doesn't make sense to buff his damage further. He already
Yeah,
has like actually good damage.
I think it's super interesting because all three of us have slightly different takes on like how strong we feel Nautilus is or like where he is in the meta, but all of us seem to agree that the solution isn't to give him more damage.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Doesn't need more.
All right. Next up, we have a base armor increase for Scion, going up from 32 to 36, and an increase to his base health regen, where he's getting 1.5 more base health regen, 7.5 to 9. I don't know. I think Scion's been doing fine. I really don't see a need for a buff, but I'm not a Scion
As,
player.
as far as tanks go, he's definitely a very weak tank. There's no like with the prominence of Cho'Gath rising up. Obviously Ornn is always really good. Malphite always has his place. Even the other like kind of tanks, like Mundo, they just kind of fit better a lot of the time. I'd say it warrants it. But I will say, Scion, just because of, for example, the popularity of Baus and these like discovery of 80 Scion over the past like couple of years that people have popularized, I think he's a toxic solo queue champ now, so I really don't like seeing him in solo queue in the first place. Like he really, no matter what, I just feel like there's something that happens when you play Scion, like your brain gets changed, the way you view things, and it's not healthy for your team. I swear to God. Like, I really don't like seeing the champ in solo queue. Like, personal opinion. I think the buff is fine. Personal opinion, though, I hate the champ in solo queue. It's disgusting.
Yep.
It just doesn't get played the way it should be played, I feel like. Especially as a tank, right?
I think if we read a bit further into the patch notes, which we'll get to later, there's a justification for some of these buffs, which is Scion is a very item-reliant tank, I think. He's a known abuser of some of the items, which are also getting nerfed on this patch. So when we get into that, we might see a bit more justification for why Scion needs a bit of a power increase.
But even then, his tankiness does a lot of his tankiness does just come from his passive HP increase, right, and his shield. So I wouldn't even say he's too item reliant most of the time. I would just think that he abuses the items quite well comparatively.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I feel like it's perfectly fine buff, but like I said, my own personal bias, I just really don't like the champion in solo queue. I think it's just such a no matter how whether it's AD or tank side, I just feel like people play it a certain way and it never really helps your team.
Yeah, I
Like
guess
they
it just
don't
gives
play it
him
as should.
a better early game, and that's like more comfortable early game, so he can do more later on. So he can hit those items that are like, where because he's so reliant on them, he can just get to them easier without like much of a problem.
What do you guys think of perhaps the idea of taking some power out of his wave clear, which allows him to proxy and have worth it deaths, and putting it back into some dueling power?
I mean it depends how you do that. Like honestly, it
Yeah,
depends how
it's
you
always
do
hard
that.
to say.
But I think what I would say is like I've always just hated that 80 science even a possibility, even in like bad matchups, right? Because I obviously some people feel like, oh, you shouldn't be able to play, Sion can't play into like Fury Gwen, and it's like, okay, but that's how tanks should be able to play. There has to be counters to tanks. And if Sion then goes 80 Sion to like, ignore that thematic counter, I think that's completely stupid. So I think to change what I would change for Sion is get rid of his 80 ratios. I really don't think he should have 80 ratios as a tank. It makes no sense. Like genuinely, like we could give him a kind of buff, like this Q increased damage from like bonus stats, kind of like how Ornn gets. Ornn doesn't get. No, he does. Yeah, on his E, he does get bonus damage from his E from stats he builds. I think that'd be a good change for Sire as well. But that way, it's like you kind of nerf his wave clear early, so he's not like egregiously annoying for people who don't play against him. But he does still have damage going into the game, so he's not a complete just damage sponge that will die at some point very easily.
Yeah, because you often find yourself in a catch-22 when you play that champ, because a lot of champs will just shred you. So it's better to just force that wave down, go and proxy, than actually play the lane phase out. But if you give him the ability to play that lane phase, then you can also strike down that very annoying playstyle at the same time. Not saying it's easy to do, but it would be nice to see them do something like that.
Yeah, I've not got more to run through on that. So I think
Yeah.
we've got no other opinions. Let's just go on to the next
Yeah,
one. Obviously,
speaking
Timo,
of annoying playstyles,
he wants the damage 125% to 145%. So
Jungle
I've
Teemo.
I've actually heard about this. I've heard generally
Hatred.
I've heard Timo, not mains, but like people who are interested in how like champions are viewed as like their characteristics, as their lore, as everything. Like Timo, they've always said like, oh, Timo makes sense as a jungler, right? Because he's like, he's the scout. And it's like, yeah, that does actually make sense in that way. And also in terms of playstyle, I think a lot of people would agree top lane Timo is just annoying. Like no one actually wants to play against Timo ever. But Jungle Teemo, I've never really heard anyone complain about it because it kind of just makes much more sense for the champion and how it should be played. So I kind of like the buff, honestly. I think it's a nice idea. I don't think it'll change much, but you can see.
I don't like Jungle Teemo. I've
Okay,
played a couple of games into it. It was super unfun.
how
So
come?
my take is he shouldn't be in the jungle and he should just stay in top lane.
what do you think is the thing that makes him an undesirable jungler? Is there a particular
Um,
feature of the champ?
to be honest, it's just what I have to deal with him in my team. He has his like gank setup is really weird. You kind of just need somebody who can go in already, and he'll just run up to you and just auto attack you.
Well, that's my
And
only real issue with Teemo Jungle is that as a jungler, he doesn't really have many tools that make sense, but I definitely agree with Zach that he thematically makes sense as a jungler. And he does provide some useful area denial specifically for objectives.
yeah, I agree with that part where his shrooms become very, very potent later as the game progresses.
I think it's a fair trade-off, though, to have a very low gank power but good agency on objectives.
Yeah.
To be fair, he definitely like the way I'm thinking about it. Obviously, like the only other range jungle I can think of is Kindred, right? But Kindred has that very niche playstyle which works. And I think Timo, when I think about it now, from when I've seen it succeed, it's like Timo, you kind of play to cheese, right? You kind of play to cheese the enemy jungle with an invade. You get like you blind them, you get like 4 attacks off in rapid succession with your attack speed from going from stealth or whatever. Like if you're level 1 at their buff, for example, that's what I'm initially thinking when I think of Timo jungle. I'm thinking something again a bit cheesy, which maybe of course we don't like cheese strats. I agree. Maybe that's why I'm like hesitant on the idea myself, because the way I've seen Timo succeed in jungle has been through cheese strats mostly. But like I said, I think it would generally be a nice, idea to have, comparative to other things. Especially as like I said, no ganking power really, but maybe he can counter gank fine, and he has good areas now later on. Like he scales a bit as a jungler, which would be a nice change of pace. But yeah, with all the points you've made, I kind of realized he wouldn't fit into the current jungle dynamic, I would say, especially as an AP pick. Like, you'd still just kind of think of, well, I want it in that area. Okay, I'll play Zyra. I want to play Brand. I'll play my Karthus instead, right? Something that scales to a big R value, Karthus. So yeah, it's
And
a
yeah,
weird
even all
thing.
those champs you mentioned just have much easier time accessing lanes, just putting Wall of Pain, for example, down on someone, slowing them
Yeah.
down, throwing a Zyra E, that makes more sense than running at them with Teemo. Unless you're like Ryla is rushing or something.
Although to be fair, Timo is a goofy little guy, and you know what?
Yep.
Once in a while, I'll laugh about it. The other times, I'll be like, I fucking hate this rat. But it is what it is.
Yep.
Moving on to the next thing. I think, eventually, I think you should take this one away. Honestly, the Yasuo buff. Seems you played
Good
him so
old
much.
Yasuo. Well, yeah, this seems to be just a response to upcoming IE changes as well, with the price going down, the AD going down. They felt the need to put a bit more power back into Yasuo's crits. And so what they've done is they've taken the damage reduction off his crit passive, because I'm not sure if everyone listening knows, but while Yasuo does hit 100% crit on 2 items, his crits are overall deal less damage compared to other champions. So this change is interesting. It's bringing his crit damage in line with everyone else, which is going to see him spiking quite a lot harder. And ironically, I think this is actually going to take down his reliance on IE. I mean, you haven't really seen that much IE Yasuo, and they probably wanted him to build IE, but this change is just going to mean he's even happier to just build utility items like Shield Bow. So, it's interesting. I don't know if it's warranted. I personally enjoy seeing Yasuo at a low win rate and being filled by a niche of skilled players using him to climb. But it seems that Riot's always looking for the route of accessibility, and I think this change is definitely along those lines. What do you guys
So,
think?
if this change happens, I was going to actually ask you, do you think, if this, obviously this change happening, right, do you think there's anything about his kit that should maybe, like tone down slightly in order to compensate for him probably getting a lot stronger off this? Because I have something in mind, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think he doesn't need a strength increase. That much I'll agree with. Like he's fine the way he is. But if he had to change something about his kit, I would consider maybe taking a bit of power out of Wind Wall, because this is a spell that really frustrates people. But just giving him a way to more easily set himself up, because right now you have these two champs, Yasuo and Yearn, for example. They both have very similar damage patterns, itemization, but in pretty much every meta, if you're maining these champs, and they're often mained as a pair, like most Yasuo players also play a good Yearn, you always want to be Yearn. You'd always much rather be Yearn because you're self-sufficient. You can do the same thing, where you do this knock-up setup onto a carry, except Yearn can do all of it for himself, whereas Yasuo needs to rely on a knock-up. And so you have this thing where like you have marginally more laning power on Yasuo, which is going to increase with this change, but you'd still, at the end of the day, you'd rather be Yearn in 90% of lobbies. And this isn't just my opinion, this is pretty much parroted from Way of the Tempest, a much better Yasuo and Yearn player than me. So I think it's interesting. Raw damage increase isn't going to change the identity of the champ. It needs to be easier for him to be self-sufficient.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, yeah, obviously, like I said, I'd agree. I've played not much Yasuo, but I played a lot more Yone, and obviously, like I said, it's just Yone is just flat better in every regard. I don't think
Yeah,
anyone
he
would
just
disagree.
feels better.
He just feels better. He has more in his kit. Literally, that's the big thing. He literally has more in his kit, and it's easier to perform on. But the thing about Yasuo, I like, in regards to this buff, right? I don't think he needs a buff personally. But the only thing I actually would want nerfed if this buff, because this buff's happening, I really don't like it. His passive shield is up far too much in lane, and I really hate it. I genuinely hate it. And it's not just the champs I play specifically. Like I know, like Zyra, for example, I never play into Yasuo. It's a terrible matchup for me. But a lot of champs I play, I just feel like Yasuo's shield, especially the fact that it absorbs such a brunt of damage when it's activated, is just too strong. Currently, like especially because he's a strong laning champ, I agree. But it's just such an annoying ability to deal with, in my opinion. And I think it's up far too often, and it blocks too much. I think it should have a cap.
I think
But it was
one
it was the
potential
thing they
way
buffed.
that we could address that, not necessarily the amount of damage that it reduces, and this is kind of already a thing because it's based off how far he travels. That's how he recharges it.
Yeah, yeah.
I think leaning more into rewarding skilled or like using his E often would to give him more charge on that passive would be better, rather than just walking around aimlessly in lane, because that's something you just do on Yasuo. As soon as you take a trade with your shield, you just pace back and forth. But there's nothing skilled about pacing back and forth, so I think taking more power out of just a natural passive regeneration and putting it more into proactive usage of his E in trades would be a healthier way for his passive shield to exist.
I think it would be nice if obviously like you have Fury on champions like Trinity and Rek'Sai. It worked kind of like that, where you can like stack it with abilities and like
Yeah.
crit, for example. Because that way it means like the early game it's not very good. Because his laning phase I understand has to be good, right? But at least it means you can genuinely punish this champion in some matchups, and you don't feel like he's just gonna like heal. He's just gonna block the next big source of damage I have because he's a shield up. So I have to pop that and then do it, right? So I think that'd be a nice change because also it does make him stronger later on because he'll have his crit up frequently, if not permanently. So he will actually play like like a menace, like a 1v1 menace where it's like, oh shit, I have to verse Yasuo in on the side lane. I genuinely have to be very, like, you have to be careful anyway. But then this time it's like, yeah, he can actually just sustain very well against me, and he can actually maybe have some sort of what do you call it, incentive to then play towards a more lifesteal build even.
Yeah, I
Kind of like
think
the way Yone does.
one of the other issues afflicting the two Wind brothers is just the unhealthiness of Bork. Like I just had enough of this item, having to build it to have meta viability on these characters, because Yasuo has a bit of an identity problem, which is that he's a melee character building carry items, and you end up in this situation where, because of passive shield, like you said, and wind wall both being in his kit, usually when a character uses their big cooldown, it becomes the enemy's turn to do something. But because Yasuo has two of these tools that deny ranged characters find themselves having barely any turns to take an action against him, while he can take as many actions as he wants against them. But on the other hand, because of the way Bork works, he also automatically just becomes an amazing pick into melee champs. And it doesn't make sense that he's performing really well into both of those things at the same time with the same build. I think this would be less of a problem if this Bork reliance was just taken away or changed in some way, so that it wasn't the usual item that you see on Yon and Yasuo. That way he'd have to be much more considerate of whether he's building to excel into melee or excel into range.
Yeah, that's valid. Who knows? Maybe they do something extreme, like make his their Q on hits half as valuable as opposed to, like, regular auto attack value. So take
Yeah,
like 4 to
it's
stack
valid.
it. I think that'd be a bit ridiculous, because then you wouldn't be able to build things like Wits End as much. But also, I don't think it'd be much of an issue. And I think the people who actually play the champ would be more happy to not feel forced to go these weird on hit variants, because it just doesn't feel as skillful.
I agree.
Speaking of nerfs, we got through all the buffs. It's time to go on to the champion nerfs going to the next patch. First on the list is Wei. So specifically, he's getting his QW base damage lowered by about from 80 to 60 level 1. The rest of it stays the same from the looks of it. And his WE damage, same thing again, 2565 down to 2060 plus a 5% AP ratio nerf. And his passive AP ratio is down 5% to 30% total. If you don't know Hui passive, it is basically when you hit 2 spells on the enemy, it will create a small AoE bubble which will explode after about a second, and if enemies inside of it, they take bonus damage on top of that.
Yep. So for those who don't speak Hui, it's basically a nerf to his fireball and his lightning bolt, and then the explosion that happens afterwards. How do we feel about that? Do we think Hui has been overperforming? Do we think this is an unwarranted nerf?
He felt strong. He does feel strong, and as he was meant to be weaker later on into the game, I feel like this kind of nerf is fine. I'm like a little bit unsure, but I think it's okay to give him a nerf for his early game, because his like early game is very safe compared to other mages. He has a lot of tools that, just because he has more abilities compared to other mages, and so with that comes with him being able to do more and his safety, and so giving him this nerf seems quite warranted.
I mean, okay, so the things that are nerfed, right? They are the QW is the lightning bolt, which does bonus damage
Yeah,
to isolate enemies, and then the WE is the mana refund auto
yeah,
attacks.
mana refund. Yeah,
So I think I agree. I think it doesn't affect the mana you get from the WE, but I do agree, like, he's kind of safe. He's not that safe though. Compared to the other
yeah.
mages, he's not that much more safe. But I played a lot of Wei, and I do think it's like perfectly fine. Because you'll get to the point where you get very comfortable landing your QW, like in any situation, and that thing does a lot of damage. Like, it really does when it scales. So I think
I
having that
actually
base damage decrease
think
is nice.
I actually think QW nerf isn't gonna be that. Actually, no, opposite. I think the QW early is big, because it's his main source of damage early game. When there's like somebody that's coming to gank that has a CC, you're gonna use QW instead of QQ. QQ is more of a spell where it scales the longer the game goes,
I don't think. I mean,
because it's based on max health damage. His QQ.
QQ.
Yeah, his QQ is max health damage. magic damage, and so that's what I feel like QW is a decent nerf to his early game on QW, where it's like really it's pretty strong if you get a stun or a like some sort of like some form of CC.
Well, yeah, regardless, yeah, the champ is the nerf is warranted. I've played a lot of Hui because generally speaking, he plays quite similar to, not quite similar, he plays somewhat similar to AP Cog. I played them both a lot. The nerf is very warranted. I think the champ, while he's not like the most easy to get into, even not because of how many abilities he has, but just because of learning when to use abilities
Yeah.
in certain situations.
When
But when you do, like you've noticed, especially high level Huis, they are consistent. That champ is disgusting, and especially his versatility between bot
he's
and
very,
mid.
he's very
It's
good.
Yeah.
completely warranted buff, like 100%.
I just
Like
think I
one
haven't
without
noticed
doubt.
because most of my pool just shits on Hue, maybe. I haven't noticed Hue's strength, but maybe I'll have to take another look at that because you guys seem to think he's very strong.
I mean, it's more like he's strong, and obviously he's not the. He's like the fourth pick though in terms of mages, and that doesn't sound
Yeah.
good, but it is still really good. Like you have your Victor, right? Your Victor's still always going to be like such a high priority mage, right? You can put him at the same level as let's say like Oriana, I would say, where it's always good. Like I think it generally fits into like anything, no problem. And sometimes there's situations where you go, yeah, I really want this champion because it absolutely demolishes here.
He has like he's like Oriana. Oriana's like what's it like terrain, being able to like seize a certain area,
What
but
zone
also have
control?
like like control, and also have like the damage and the range as some other mages, like the Victor, able to like push you out and stuff. He's just like he's like the mage where like you throw other mages together, like you get a conglomerate. He's like
I
all these
think,
mages at once.
like, if I wanted to take Hue down a peg, I wouldn't do it directly through the damage in his kit. I just, like, as a mid laner myself, the thing I find the most obnoxious about him is just how much space his QE takes up. Like, when he puts that thing down, especially diagonally in the lane, there's just nowhere to stand. And that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get hit by it. It's just every time he presses that extremely low cooldown spell, there's just a period of no interaction between you and your opponent. I just think it's extremely boring. So I'd have just personally reduced that QE hitbox. And you can definitely do that, and you can still hit all the creeps with it for his wave clear. It just feels very obnoxious that it takes up so much space.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I see, I see. I wouldn't personally agree, but I can see the point for it. I'd say the same about Victor E, not because it's overpowered, but just because it's a bit annoying. You kind of forget sometimes that it can hit you.
I think Victor is just too
But
easy to hit right now. That's the only problem.
I'd agree with that. But even before that, it's just one of those. It's one of those. I'd say it's one of those mental gaps. Sometimes you
Yeah.
notice it, but if you do notice it, you never forget noticing it, kind of thing. But yeah, I think moving on to the next nerf, the Callista W max HP nerf, down from 1418 scaling to 1018. Nice. Honestly, that champion is really like obviously people know Callista is like kind of a lame bully. You know, this champ that really needs to snowball. But I think that max HP damage was absurd. I think anyone who's played against it or played with it would get it really quickly as well. Like
Hmm.
100% warranted nerf.
I would like to see a bit of power given back to the late game, though. I don't want her to become a scaling threat, but I always just feel like she is just a pathetic champ when she doesn't have a perfect game.
She does require a
Ace.
lot to pull off. Well, I'd say
Especially in
if you're not
solo
like
queue.
good at it,
She's a
really.
very dangerous champ for balancing around pro, though. So you always have to consider that. But
Yeah, it's always a mess with that. I would agree
It's
though. I think
hard.
the late game's a little bit lackluster comparatively.
I think maybe
But I guess
seeing maybe like, because that's a 4% decrease from the early levels, maybe a 4% decrease is fine, but exchange that for maybe a 2% late. Then we'd be adjusting the champ not only to nerf the problem, but also to move them to a healthier position.
I would say I feel like you play Callisto with the same mindset of Draven. If you don't want the game to go past like 25, 30 minutes without you being in full control, because otherwise, you're not playing correctly. And I guess in solo queue that's somewhat toxic because you can't really control the factors in solo queue like you could in a competitive environment as well. But I would also be inclined to say like as much as it would be a good idea to shift her to a bit later, have a bit of a stronger later. She doesn't need it. Like
She
if you
doesn't
do
need it.
fail to perform, that's I guess the punishment. Same with Draven. or hopefully the same in theory with Draven and like other early game champs. But yeah, I could definitely see it being a possibility, not necessity, but just an idea floated by.
Alright, next up we've got Kog'Maw, just taking a hit to his Q damage, going from 90 scaling to 290 to 80 scaling to 260, so losing damage at all levels. What do you think about
Yeah,
that
sure.
resident Kog'Maw player?
Champs OP deserves it.
Good. I agree. I agree 100%.
I mean, it's just like, it's like there's nothing to say about it. It's literally just like that's deserved. The Q is quite easy to hit. It's surprisingly long range, like 1025 range. I think it's like really surprising. People don't realize it, and it's just really it's low cooldown as well. Like whether you play AP or AD, it's the second thing you max. So I think it does cover both ranges quite well as a nerf, as far as Cogma nerfs should go. So I do generally like that a lot. Like even though I play the champ, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and especially the way that champ is played, it's not a brutal nerf at all. 10 damage on that ability.
I mean, yeah, it still shreds. It still does the shredding. So
Yeah.
like, you're still happy with it. You're still gonna probably max it second. It's just not gonna be like it's perfectly good nerf for what you'd expect.
I think we're in
Simple as that.
agreement. Yeah.
The next one, obviously, paired up with Kog'Maw normally Lulu. These are big nerfs. So the W attack speed, or I say big nerfs, they're somewhat big nerfs. W attack speed from 2535 down to 2030. The W cooldown from 1715, it goes to 1816, and the E base shield strength such damage is 8260 to 8240. So I say big nerf. I thought it was more. It's not that big, but again, I think Lulu is just always like the best enchanter in the game. I think everyone would agree with that.
She just does everything, and she just fills all of the niches that you could want, other than actual healing. But then when someone gets that R cast on them, they are effectively healed anyway, just by the stat change. So I mean, she's been the queen for a while, so seeing her taken down a peg just makes perfect sense. And I like the way they've done it, just general nerfs of all of her abilities. Any thoughts, Vincent? I think we've lost him.
I think it's good to see her again nerfed. The champion needed it a lot because even in lane, just giving that W attack speed, like that steroid with the shield, man, was it just like sitting back and do nothing until that ran out. But even then, when it ran out, it felt like there was no time for you to do anything, because the moment you go in, she has it up and you're automatically at a disadvantage. She gives like what, an extra more than a dagger's worth, and the shield is like insane.
Yeah, it's she's just good at all points of the game. Like these are like small nerfs, but hopefully they make the laning phase a bit weaker.
And with the cooldown like increasing, it's like more of a window, more of an opportunity to punish when she uses it, so you can have a window to attack.
I think even after this, she'll still be ARS tier easily.
100%.
I
The champ
agree,
will never, the champ will
but it's
never
definitely
be
something.
weak. Yeah,
A little bit more opportunities to maybe punish her, or punish when they go in or whatnot.
Potentially, but speaking of opportunities, Twitch getting Axiom Arcanist treated as AoE damage nerf, which basically just means his ultimate is going to do less damage with the Axiom Arcanist scaling because of how it will be treated. And honestly, like I said, I think it's like whatever, you know what I mean?
I don't get why it wasn't ranged.
Yeah.
No, well, it wasn't AoE at the start, because it
I
just
think
felt
everyone
like
said
an
that.
AoE ability.
It's just a weird, like we were all surprised when we saw it release, like, and it's a thing that a lot of people didn't think to do because they were like, oh, it's gonna suck because it's AoE, and then people were like, no, single target, like really, and then you just start seeing these crazy glides, I mean, which is admittedly fun to watch, but was it healthy? Definitely not.
Yeah. Definitely not the way it should have been coded. I mean, it's just like again, this is just like it's a nerf, but it's like this is how it should have been in the first place. So I don't have any negative thoughts on it in the slightest.
I'd like to see maybe a tiny bit of compensation going to incentivizing a traditional crit Twitch, because right now we just have this crazy one-shot build. Still, the meta has been the meta for a while now. It just feels really boring to play against. And he's also very, very enchanter reliant as well, despite being one of the kings of the patch.
It's valid. And the final nerf, a Warwick Q nerf. The Q cost is coming from 7090 to 8100. It's just a lane Warwick nerf. I don't think I see Warwick jungle often enough. If I do, I think it's just perma losing. To be fair, I wouldn't be surprised if that Warwick jungle win rate is like 45% somehow. But Warwick top is just I wouldn't say toxic, but it is like to a degree somewhat toxic. Whether it's to your team because you're inhibiting your team from like playing traditionally, and kind of being forced to play around you and your barrier cooldowns at times,
Yeah,
and your 1v1 potential.
it can be fun to watch sometimes, and there's some impressive players who play it, but at the same time, it's also still got that cheese status, and I think this is the right kind of change. Just giving him more opportunities to fuck up and lose the lane is what's needed in order for it to be allowed to exist up there.
Yeah, it's just like he doesn't belong up there in the first place, but no one's gonna really complain because it's always been kind of like specifically cheese strat. But it does feel very odd when you literally have a champ like Fiora and it's like, oh, I'd rather play Warwick as like the duelist, champ that can actually just kind of beat everyone 1v1 because I was treated. So yeah, I think a little nerf, maybe changes with again top win rate by like 2%, but nothing too much. Now, the I'd say the biggest one of the patch, right, the champion adjustment, the Mel adjustment. Well, it's mostly nerfs. So I'll just quickly run through it. The Q missile speed is going from 5,000 down to 4,500. The Q range is going from 1,000 down to 950. The W duration is going from 1 second to 0.75. The W damage is going from 40-70 to 40-60 percentages. W mana is going from 60-0 to 80-0. The E route is going from 1.75 seconds to 2.25 down to 1.25 to 2.25. The E damage is going from 62-220 plus 50% to 62-40 plus 60%. And the R per stack AP ratio is going from 2.5% up to 3.5%. Okay. What this basically means is that it's just obnoxious. No one likes playing against the champ. Everyone's agreed it's just annoying as hell. Whether it's OP or not, it's up to people's personal opinions. But the general consensus has been that she's got too much strength in her kit, especially how uninteractive she is what I've heard. I don't know if you guys have heard differently, but I would be very happy with all these changes. I do not like the champion.
Yeah, I've had a limited experience with her because she has had just an unprecedented ban rate as well ever since she's been released. Probably just because of that annoyance factor that you mentioned. It's just not fun to play against a character that can hit you for free with no repercussions. And
Yeah,
especially when you finally find that opportunity to go in and she can just say no with her W, it's never going to be a fun time. But I think analyzing these changes, it looks like what Riot's trying to do here, because she's already been nerfed for lane. She's been nerfed as a mid laner, been nerfed as an APC in bot lane, and she's been pushed into a bit of a support niche where she's building Zazax and relying on her quite overloaded base damage to spam with a cheap build, and she effectively just becomes a carry because of that passive, along with running a cheap support build. It's hard to tell the difference between the damage of a lane Mel and a fed support Mel. So what this does by taking all of her base damage down and her cooldowns down and putting more power into that R stacking, it incentivizes her to actually play the game using her kit, farm those stacks, and try and come online that way, which hopefully will push her away from that unhealthy support playstyle and make her a punishable lane, which is what we want to see in the first place.
I agree, 100%.
So a lot of words,
Something.
and there's a lot of words in that patch adjustment, but yeah.
She just felt like whenever I played into her, she felt like her damage was a little overloaded. She felt like she had just maybe a slight bit too much damage, and she felt really safe to. And if you try to go in on her like disengage is really good. So having this like E, so like what was it? The duration of the root decrease early seems quite nice, and the overall damage of it is also getting nerfed, which is nice. It's just her. I feel like her early game is a little bit too strong compared to like other mages of her like caliber.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the E damage is getting buffed actually a little bit later, and ratio went up, but the root went down definitely. Yeah, champ is just it's one of a kind technically, but also it's just nothing enjoyable about it. No one likes it. To no one's surprise, I feel like all the general consensus is that. But moving on to a different adjustment, we got a Diana adjustment. The passive monster modification on her passive, I believe, is going from 3 times to down to 2.25%, 2.25 times. The Q damage is going up, and the W damage is also increasing. And I think it's just you could just nerf her passive damage without having to buff her. I think the champ is perfectly fine. Simple as that.
Yep, she's always just been known for that ridiculously fast clear, and then she doesn't really have any other shortcomings as a jungler. Like her engage
Or as a laner.
is very straightforward. She just throws that Q, and whether or not she hits it, she can E onto you. But like Zach said, I think it's a bit curious because she's already like any mid lane player who's had to quickly climb through Boblo will tell you Diana's just a great pick for when you just need to you see an enemy champ, especially melee matchups, and you're just like, oh, okay, I need to shit on this guy and just kill him with Ignite. Diana's a great pick for doing so, and the fact that she has this like crazy Smurf viability means that she does not need, especially a damage increase on 2 of her main abilities. Absolutely wild. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see a slower clearing Diana. It's going to take a while to adjust to that. But overall, a pretty warranted change. She's been top dog for a while now. The damage increase, questionable.
Questionable, unnecessary, all of the above. The next adjustment, again, another kind of big one, is the Elise adjustment. Again, so the human W damage, which basically means the exploding spider, right? That is getting a hard nerf. I'm not going to go into the numbers. The spider W attack speed buff is going up. The spider W cooldown is going down, and your spiderlings are generally going up in damage by quite a significant amount. So what all this is saying is they want to remove Elise from that cheesy support role where you like W max and you just spam W and E in lane, and make him more of a potent jungler instead. And I think these changes are perfectly good for that. I think at least jungle's always been fine, but I think the support has always been very toxic, even though I like seeing versatility in champs.
Yeah, I do think her support playstyle was definitely like very toxic. She just felt like a jungler, like a fed jungler, but as a support, so you can like run around and you don't need to really care about. I mean, not to say not care about objectives, but to say like she can do other things instead of like mainly going for objectives. She can be like elsewhere on the map and like focus on bot lane and just get bot lane at, like with being able to like one shot AD carries and stuff, and even like mid laners at that, and just have that priority. Kind of insane. So yep, I like it.
I think that,
Very,
like
very
champs
nice.
like that, it's just a bit of a shame that because of Zazax and Darkseal, that these champs that originally would have to spend quite a lot of gold to do a lot of damage just sort of become able to half your health with essentially free items. It just always feels quite unhealthy when a champ can just exist on those two. So I'm also happy to see those changes.
Yeah, bad playstyle, bad design in some ways for the role, but simple as that. Now the system buffs. Merc treads are going down 50 gold to 1250 cost. Just make them 1200. I don't know why they're 1300. I still hate that to this day. And the symbiotic souls move speed increase come from 35 to 40. Yeah, that's insanely strong. Not necessary at all for people to actually buy it.
Yeah, I
In
think
terms of the boots,
it's not happening at all elos or in all lanes, but there's a lot of symbiotic soul tech that's been developed, and the tech being just purchase the symbiotic souls as a solo laner, because people have caught on to the fact that like it used to be as pretty much only built on support, but having that empowered recall all the time is just absurdly powerful, especially when a lot of the skill of solo lanes comes from managing your reset timers and avoiding missing minions. Having an item that just takes half of the skill out of it is just an incredible spike, especially with the other boots being more expensive, where to the point where you're like, I don't want to invest that much gold in them anymore, and then you have these cheap shoes. Buffing them seems crazy to me, but
it's just they're not used enough, I guess. But again, I always hate that Riot idea where it's like, oh, this isn't very popular, so we're gonna buff it. It's like it doesn't need a buff. Just because it's not picked much doesn't mean it's not strong, and things can be situational. Especially like I said, the solo lane tech, and obviously you don't even run TP, then it counts for you not running TP. So you can do things like run Ghost on Vladimir, for example, or you can run like guaranteed Ignite on Garen every game, and it's just insane. It's not necessary.
It's interesting we haven't seen Cho'Gath in these patch notes, because Cho'Gath has been one of the abusers of symbiotic souls. People have been running Ghost on him top lane and just using the souls to go and proxy. It's quite disgusting to watch.
Yeah, absolutely despise that champion. Had to play into it. It was just the most unfun right now. It's the thing I've been permabanning, that champion. I would like to see that champion next to be on the chopping block.
It does have a bit too much damage in low quantities, I would definitely say. But moving on to the quick system nerfs, there's an Abyssal Mask nerf. The MR is going down by 5, down to 45. We have Fimbulwinter, which is going from 100 to 180 scaling shield plus 4.5% current mana to flat 100 plus 4.5% current mana. The Heartsteel nerf is damage to max HP conversion from 10% down to 8%. Plated Steel Caps, a big one. The damage reduction is going down from 12% to 10%. And Unending Despair, the Anguish damage is no longer going to have a flat amount. It's just going to be 3% bonus HP. Simple as that.
Yep, this is just a hit at all of the mainstay tank items. It seems
Yeah.
that have been present in this health tank meta. So I'm happy to see a more of a return to resistances as the main thing that you're itemizing on tanks. But at the same time, I think we're seeing a few familiar faces in these nerfs, such as the steel caps percentage going down. We saw what happened the last time they did this nerf. It seems we're rocking back and forth between AD carry killing you no matter what you build and AD carry doing no damage. We just keep going back and forth between these two and never finding a happy medium. If only one of the Riot employees watched one of the previous podcasts we did. Gave some potential fixes to that problem.
GG. We need to flame Riot more, is what I'm hearing from this. We need to have our voices heard. But yeah, I mean, just overall, tank nerfs, those 3 items, it's and Despair, the 4 items, sorry.
Deserved.
They're good.
Deserved.
Yeah,
Yep.
they're really strong. They are, and like, it's not even making them too much weaker, it's just making it so it's like, okay, they don't feel egregious anymore.
For me, it
especially
was Unending Despair. That item was. Ooh.
It's still, but it still probably will be a bit, just not as a first time rush, which I think is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And obviously, with the Fimbulwinter thing, so same with Heartsteel, right? The max HP conversion, it'll be a bit weaker later as opposed to that, but still good because it does chunk you sometimes. And yeah, the Fimbulwinter, just having guaranteed almost like guaranteed shield as opposed to it's actually scaling, just feels much better, much more sense. Keep it simple is usually the best way to do things. I'd say.
Yeah. I think one of the terms we've been hearing a lot in the League community recently is lobby admin. And I think a lot of the champs that build these items reach that sort of lobby admin status where they just run around, do whatever they want, and you can't really do anything about it once they get ahead. And I think knocking back these items just stops that, which is really good.
I personally still prefer the term raid boss, but a new term ain't too bad, specific to the game. You know what, it's nice. And then the final thing, the system adjustment, obviously the Infinity Edge change, down 150 gold, down 580. Yeah, Yasuo, we'll see him next patch a lot.
There's going to be a lot of champs enjoying that change. Pretty much every crit builder is happy to see that because, again, it's not really been a power level issue for IE for a while now. It's just an accessibility issue. It just feels really rough to build, commit that price, and I'm pretty sure I speak for every crit builder here when I say that I'd rather the item be weaker and actually be able to build it comfortably. So that's definitely a change in the right direction for IE, I think. Thoughts, Vincent?
Agreed.
Yep.
Agreed. It's just super expensive and you don't get it early enough. I like to see I don't mind having slightly less agency with it being slightly weaker, but having it earlier definitely has the impact.
Yeah, I think everyone we've
nice
talked to with a IQ above room temperature has said that most of the power of the item comes from its passive anyway. So we're not upset to lose. Even though it's arguably not a good trade in terms of gold versus AD, we don't mind because we know what we're building the item for, and it's not just the flat AD number.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. That's all the patch notes done.
That is indeed.
That is it.
I think the only thing, as much as I'd like to talk about a lot, I think the only thing we need to really mention, of course, just for the sake of community, is obviously the hex that get chests. Well, controversy, we'll
Yeah,
say.
it's been a big
The,
deal.
Riots.
I think
What have you done? What have you done?
for all three of us, since we've gotten into the game, however long ago that's been for each of us, those chests have just always been, that's always been a thing you can rely on having.
Yeah,
Is you play the
always
game
a good thing
enough,
to have.
like sure, you'll get your content much faster if you pay, which is obviously fine. But if you play the game enough, you will eventually get some skins. And now
Yeah,
seeing
and I
Riot
think that was
take
good.
that away, I think everyone's had a bitter reaction to that. Has anyone seen anything
Yeah.
different?
I mean, I've seen some questionable takes on Twitter. Obviously, I do remember the names of the people who said it because they're like in the League community, but I think those people are also just stupid, and there's no point name dropping for no reason. But I've seen people say like, oh, it was free. Why are you complaining about them taking away free stuff? And it's like, it's not about the fact they're taking away free stuff. It's more about the fact that you're just making the player experience so much worse without giving it any positive trade-off, and entering a really negative system that everyone agreed is like a very predatory financial area, which just isn't good.
I also saw somebody say like League players are very, very what's the word? They resent and you so like they will hold on to that kind of grudge for a long time. And so even if they do bring it back, they've already opened the floodgates for them being like, "Oh, remember that time Riot was about to, and they actually doing it is just more of a reason."
Yeah, I think one thing that like one of the justifications that they gave is that the the employees aren't getting paid enough or aren't making enough money. And it seems to me that like, well, you can say that, but then you can also look at the profit that these companies are making, and you realize, oh, it's
Didn't they also like lay off like a bunch of
yeah,
their
yeah.
employees as well? Like that's
A
also
large
It's
cutoff
just
in the
nonsensical,
on
right?
social.
Because the company's
oh,
making more,
100%.
the company's making more and more money. You can track it on a graph; it just goes straight up, and yet they're trying to argue at the same time that their employees aren't taking enough home, enough money home. It's like, how about you just pay your employees properly, leave things the way they were? Like, I don't think they were having any problems making money. All right,
No,
I don't think
this
it's ever been a money problem.
this is just this is just gaslighting by Riot.
it's a greed problem.
Hmm.
Literally just a greed problem. It's honestly quite insane when you think about it. But
It's
yeah,
kind of scary to think like they're pushing this kind of thing.
And
What's to say like they don't do any more like something else? That's kind of insane.
yeah, and it might seem like we're giving a repetitive take on this, but I think the more voices are saying the idea that no, we're not as gamers going to accept this sort of model of you don't own anything. Like the games you pay for aren't yours. You're just leasing them. Content is all paid. Like make games about the game developers and the players again. Stop making everything into a money making agenda. I think that's what everyone's saying.
Yeah.
it's wild. You never know. I still believe, generally speaking, that like if it wasn't such quick cash grab, you would just generally make more over time. Like
Yeah,
factually.
Oh,
100%.
100%.
It's not even like
It's
a
that
financial,
simple.
economical perspective. It's not even like debatable. It's just factual. I feel like, or maybe not factual because there's only so much. It's only been such a recent issue, but it's concerning, and I think maybe they'd benefit if they just had a bit of humanity. But that's something else entirely.
All right then.
On that very touchy, or not even touchy subject, on that somewhat controversial subject, apparently controversial. I think everyone can agree it's, stupid in the first place, unless you are stupid yourself. But anyway, that's the end of this week's podcast. I believe so. Unless you have any final words, Vincent? Maybe any final words?
Nerf Cho'Gath, please. I'm not having fun. Smiley
Aw.
face. But apart from that,
I'm sure you'll get your wishes eventually.
yeah.
That build has been popping off. There's no way they don't
That champ,
notice it.
champ's a bit obnoxious. Actually, I do have one more thing to add. Obviously, if you guys do watch our live streams, I'd like to critique Vincent, your choice in thumbnail on this very professional channel we're running. What the fuck?
I
Defend
I I
yourself,
like it.
boy.
I like it. It's something.
Why-
It's just I find it really funny. I find it really
yeah?
really funny.
Could you tell us what art medium you pulled that from? Like, how did you find that image?
I got it from the Google search engine image section.
Yeah? What exactly did you type in, Vincent, to find that image?
Hot eyes anime girl. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this time you gave me a Hagos, and so I went to see some. And next stream, if you guys are all gonna be tuning in, on either my stream or on the Tavern stream, I will be having a different thumbnail, which might be permanent, and
Oh, God.
it will be maybe slightly worse, maybe slightly better. Who knows?
Goodness gracious,
That's for you guys to.
I'm gonna have to put some ground rules in place on what you can and can't use, but yeah. I did tell him if he's gonna do that, he should at least do it right, you know. At least use
Yeah.
some
Proper.
accurate
Yeah.
material to the game you're playing, at the very least. But yeah. On that jovial note.
Maybe I get a commission and just get like, you know.
Okay, now you're just going too crazy with it.
Okay, but let's calm down. Let's go back to your regular scheduled solo queue. I think.
Yep. On that rather jovial note, I think it's goodbye from us. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we hope to see you again in the next episode of the Climb Podcast.